Hi, it's Dustin Lanier. Thanks for listening. Please find me on LinkedIn for original public sector operations content every week. And please reach out to me if I and my team of procurement professionals at Civic Initiatives can help you be a public procurement change agent. Morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and public procurement. And so how do we make these two programs aware of each other and help with the mutual success of both programs without breaking other things in the mission that each of them may have individually? So I think it's an interesting topic and certainly very current for people in terms of building and executing these programs. We're helping a large state customer with this exact planning sequence. So I appreciate people being able to come on to discuss it in a panel. There's also a survey that is out right now that is through December 2nd. I'll probably extend that just because realistically with Thanksgiving coming up, people may not see it until next week. So that'll be part of our discussion as well. So we have several people who are available to talk about this topic. Jamie, I always start with you since you help us with some good morning energy. So what are you guys doing to try to connect your DEI and your public procurement programs, and what are you dealing with today, and where are you trying to focus?
Thanks, Dustin. DEI is really a very hot topic in the procurement community. Like, the question is why? Why is it such a hot topic? We've gone along for all of these years, and I think there's a couple of reasons. The DEI that we're looking at from a procurement perspective, it widens the pool of potential suppliers, promotes competition. And then if you think about the sourcing options that we continue to struggle with on a daily basis, this helps us build more resilient and agile supply chains. And again, from whether you're state, you're local, you're federal, it doesn't matter. A diverse supplier, right, is one that, I'm going to say a general definition, is at least 51% owned and operated by an individual or a group that is traditionally underrepresented or underserved. That could be minority owned, women owned, small businesses. It could be LGBTQ, veterans, proprietors with disabilities. There's a whole host of ways to think about this. And so specifically, Dustin, getting back to your question around the state of Maine, we're off in the top northeast corner of the state. We kind of do our own thing up here. We're not fortunate enough to be in the middle of the country where we can look at 10 different states around us and their suppliers. So it's even more critical that we broaden our supplier base, and that we are looking at kind of a 2 to 3 year timeline to accomplish really a diverse program, no pun intended, of course. So we are looking to bring some folks on to help us build our DEI program. We've got to first look at the data, figure out, what's out there in the marketplace in the state of Maine specifically, and then we can look to other regions to support that supply chain. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? Where's the goalpost going to be? Do we need to reset the goalpost? And ultimately, there is a considerable amount of education that will be required, both with internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. And then what if you bring in folks that maybe don't have even English as their first language? So that's just one of the barriers to think about, is how do we communicate with folks that talk different languages and read different languages, and then you're trying to introduce them to a government process. All things that are challenges, but not such that we can't overcome them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a million topics we could go into. Well, we do have a couple of folks who joined us at 7 a.m. with a morning coffee on the West Coast, which was nice of them. So I'll go to Justin and then Victor. Give us some context as far as, Justin, since you're higher ed, is the question any different in a higher ed construct than in a state construct, and what are you trying to do to connect these programs?
I think for our system, the context is very similar to the state of California, because our 10 campuses and our medical centers span all the way from San Diego practically in the south to Davis, up in the north. So our campuses do cover the state of California's economy. I think there's 2 or 3 reasons that in California and right now, DEI became very important to our supply chain organization. First is coming out of the pandemic, we really saw 2 things. We saw first the value of diversity in our supply chain. For a lot of years, I think companies and big organizations had really focused and said, well, how do we concentrate our supply chain? How do we make it as efficient and just in time as possible? And then when we encountered during the pandemic a situation where certain items became more difficult to get or in short supply, what we really found out was a diverse supply chain is a resilient supply chain that protects operations and makes things available for everybody. At the same time, we learned that that the pandemic impacted our small and diverse businesses in California much more so than our large suppliers. And so, college towns are, our campuses want to be seen as integral members of their community. And so focusing on doing business with our community and being part of our community as a way to help restore it coming out of the pandemic is important. So those are, I think, the 2 things that caused us last year to introduce a program called Small Business First, which we have had over the last couple of years, the goal system-wide of doing 25% of our business with small and diverse suppliers. But what we tried to do was create a policy ramp that made it easier for us to do business with these types of suppliers. And so for us, what that means is that normally our campuses and the university are required to compete most purchases over $100,000. What we did was we created a streamlined authority where if you're working with small and diverse suppliers, you can get quotes from two qualified bidders and award to a small business all the way up to $250,000. And what we hope that does is it provides opportunity for more suppliers to get involved in our supply chain and really help us to be a stronger part of our community.
So, Victor, you're up in Washington and you work with Spokane. And so how is it different or the same for political subdivision? And what kind of things are you guys doing to try to connect these 2 programs?
Sure. Just a couple clarifications. Spokane, for those that aren't around this region, even though it's spelled with a K-A-N-E, you're just showing your lack of diversity in understanding geographical locations and their names. Joke.
Let's see, where's the other place that's like that? There's another place.
Any place in Alaska.
No, there's
a
place where if you pronounce the A wrong, that your tagged as being ignorant. I'll have to think about that one. Okay, go ahead, Victor.
My other comments, this is pre-coffee, but anytime you go into a conversation, you have to define the terminology and just like Jamie did, and then ask the why questions. Why are we discussing this? Why is this important? And I struggle with this in the sense that I think there's a lot of confusion what DEI is about, and often, not saying it's hijacked, but it's used for alternative purposes. And I struggle with DEI in regards to when we do an RFP, we're looking for the best. We're not looking for, I mean, if there's a grant requirement, yes, there's certain requirements, but we want the best of the best. So I struggle with that. And I'm part of a nationwide education group who does an annual survey of their members. And they find it's hard to put people in categories because they don't include that information in their survey. I struggle at times where I want to indicate who I am, what my ethnic background is, because I don't want to be put in a box. And that's my thought process. Anytime I'm looking forward towards a solicitation, I'm looking at the solution. How can you help me? Not who are you? That part becomes important as we move into a relationship. So in regards to a program where I work at, a DEI program, it's not really, it's kind of like on a back burner because we often think that we're not being inclusive when we reach out to anybody. Anybody has a chance to put in a solicitation, and we're not cutting anybody out for a chance to participate.
I did think of the example that I was scrabbling for there, Victor. It was Nevada and Nevada. So if you get that wrong, you're tagged. So now I know for years. Well, thanks for the input on that, Victor. And we're kind of just going around the room and letting everybody get some initial thoughts. Let's come to Kristen. Kristen, you're with a county, and how does your procurement shop connect to DEI, and how does it impact on a daily basis the way that you're doing work?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I am with Shelby County government right here in Tennessee. And first, I am enjoying the conversation and the perspectives because it really shows, I'll say, pun intended, the diversity of what's happening kind of on a widespread across the country. Here in the county, I will say probably from a county and citywide, all the municipalities for at least about the last approximate 10 to 15 years have focused heavily on diversity and locally owned small businesses, minority women-owned enterprises as well. And here at the county, we actually have ordinances that impact my daily governmental procurement work. We are required at a certain threshold to only solicit to locally owned small businesses where the availability exists. So not just if we have one locally owned small business that provides something, the competition still has to be there. But to a certain threshold, it's if they get the first bite at the apple. Above that threshold, we do application of subcontract goals, again, based on availability of our local database that we have on available vendors. And that can, again, just apply to just locally owned small businesses. We have previously had minority and women-owned businesses, and it has currently been dismantled as we go through a new disparity study. What I can appreciate about disparity studies is that they actually give you the statistical background to identify, is there a disparity, has there been a disparity, and how can we move forward in trying to minimize that. And to reduce that disparity. So it was interesting, Jamie. I loved your widening the supply base, promoting diversity, creating that resilience and the agile supply chains. But I think for the county here, while all of those things are super true, and I wish that we would speak more to that, I think the heaviest piece that is driven the ordinances and the different regulations that we have is the disparity studies or the disparity that's been identified. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. But on a daily basis, I'm required by our ordinances, which is our law, for me to apply those rules. And again, knowing that the procurement government space is for me to be fair and consistent across all vendor bases. So listening to you, Victor, I could appreciate your comments, specifically from just a government procurement base and how do you intertwine that in a fair way. And so our ordinances that I've been a part here attempt to do that and in supporting the locally owned small businesses. So I've enjoyed everybody's comments thus far and looking forward to the rest.
Thanks. So David, you're the former procurement officer for Pennsylvania, and then you currently help procurement shops to be able to find and identify vendors through some portal means. So how do you consider the topic of DEI programs and public procurement and how they touch each other and can improve each other's mission?
As I told Dustin, I've been off of Clubhouse for like 3 months until I saw your post. So I'm trying to get back in the swing of things. So I have two quick observations, and then I could talk a little bit later about what we're doing. But the first is, back when I was in procurement, I think there was a misperception, which I think is still true today, that choosing to work with minority or women-owned companies comes at a cost, both either a cost in terms of the quality of the service that you're going to get compared to a big multinational, or comes at the cost of cost. It's more expensive to do it. And I think they're deep-rooted beliefs, but I think they're actually not true. And one thing that was interesting back in our day in Pennsylvania, As Dustin knows, we had a very aggressive strategic sourcing initiative that saved us $140 million. And the consultant we hired at the time, who was not Civic, this is pre-Civic, told us that you couldn't save money and expand opportunities for diverse businesses at the same time, that they were mutually exclusive. But at the same time that we saved all that money, we actually were able to quadruple our minority and women business participation rate. So I think that was sort of my first big takeaway, is that don't let people tell you that a diversity initiative is going to cost you more money. It doesn't have to. My second observation, going to what Jamie said, which I thought was super interesting, around trying to build first a main and then sort of a regional network of diverse businesses, is I really do think there's an opportunity for jurisdictions to share learnings and share suppliers here. I went quickly to Google Maps and I saw that from Boston, my hometown, to the other 5 New England state capitals, the distances from Boston to those capitals are 160 miles, 51 miles, 67, 100, and 180. So there's a great opportunity just within one part of the country to find and cultivate and rate great diverse businesses, and then to share knowledge about those great companies between states, between cities and counties, so that everyone can work with great minority or women-owned or LGBTQ-owned companies.
Thank you, David. So joining us this morning also is Derek Davis, who's on my team. So Derek is running that one project we're doing for a state client where we're helping them take the outputs of a disparity study and help to create the right kind of infrastructure within the procurement shop to make that possible, to be able to drive that kind of outcome that's contemplated in that study. So Derek, are you on and able to come off mic and talk a little bit about the kind of topics that we're looking at and maybe pose a question if you have one?
One of the things that is really interesting in this particular space is just how much differentiation we have across all the different entities at all the different levels. Just listening to you all talk, everybody's got a slightly different approach, a slightly different method. And so it's very interesting when you're trying to build the program from the ground up, which of those works really well. So I'd be curious to hear, I think the one question I would love to hear from this group is, where have you done something that you feel has had a extremely positive impact on a program like this, or even just in general to how you're engaging the community of vendors in this space?
In doing the research and kind of talking to other folks, I think the 2 points that I would bring up is, in creating a DEI program, it can't be a reactive process, right? You can't just all of a sudden go out there and say, I'm going to give a preference to this categorized vendor or this categorized vendor, right? Because that doesn't work. It needs to be a carefully thought out program, and it needs to apply to the particular marketplace that you are trying to address. And then secondarily, we've talked a lot about how underrepresented or underserved vendors get contracts, but just because the dotted line has been signed does not mean that these vendors know necessarily what to do thereafter. So the process is an iterative process that needs to continue throughout the duration of the contract. Great that they get the contract and they, right, being defined as whatever the vendor is for that particular program, but it's a partnership, right, to help educate vendors who are underrepresented or underserved. And it's also helping them to continue to not only perform, but to meet all of the requirements, performance measures, performance metrics, et cetera, throughout the contract. So again, it's really thinking from a full acquiring a contract throughout the duration of the contract all the way to contract closing, that a DEI program will be successful.
Wholeheartedly agree with you, Jamie. My lessons learned are kind of around some of what Jamie just mentioned. I think for any of the programs that you choose to implement or execute, it has to be supported in data. So when I specifically think about the MWBE space and having those really good comprehensive disparity studies done to actually define where you create those categories and how you decide to move forward to create the application of the subcontract goals is really key. And once you have that data and you execute, I think it's important to make sure that you understand the true availability of those businesses when you are looking to apply goals and not putting false or not as accurate goal on a project to where it won't be successful. If nothing else, no one may meet the requirements and you end up having to do a rebid or again, just not being able to successfully meet that goal because it wasn't a true goal to put there. And then to your point, Jamie, the contract administration piece is extremely key. The contract compliance piece is extremely key in making sure you are being aligned with any laws and regulations, aligned with the outcome and implementation of the disparity study. And you want to make sure all of that is sound so you're not diminishing the trust of the public. I think that's the other key piece that we've had to make sure that we pay attention to the application of our programs and that they're done in a way that helps vendors continue to even want to work with us and trust the process. One area that I have seen success in the application of our previous MWBE program was in the construction space, where there were vendors who typically would not have been prime contractors for particular projects, and the growth and the way that they were able to scale up through our programs has been effective for those businesses and ultimately the community. So my lessons learned would be having sound data for execution and the contract compliance piece. And then the success, and I didn't have a specific story, but I have just seen that growth in that space of construction because of the programs that have been implemented.
To build on some of the comments here, your program is not going to be successful if you're just really hyper focused on individual transactions and finding, trying to make awards, more broadly. What really drives success is creating an environment and a community around driving this type of program and having your organization embrace it. So, within the University of California, what that means is working with our business partners on campus to think about what are the suppliers that they need to help them find sources of data that discover supplier discovery, to help them build relationships with small and diverse suppliers in the community. It's working with our current suppliers to find out what types of support they need, and working with even some of our larger suppliers to understand how they've approached this problem or this topic in their organizations, and then what resources and investments can they make to actually promote small and diverse business within our supply chain. Working with external organizations like the business councils and the chambers of commerce to understand their membership, what their membership tells them suppliers need in order to be successful, and to use them as a venue to develop relationships with a robust supply base. And then finally, I think David alluded to this in his comments, working with agency partners or other public organizations who are close to us to share information, share common approaches, share supplier relationships, so that we're not pulling alone on this, and that when suppliers and when the community participate, they feel like maybe it's not going to just benefit their relationship with the University of California, but it may also benefit their relationship with the community colleges or the state of California as well.
Thanks for all of that. I mean, that was extremely helpful in thinking about where to go, because one of the things that we have sort of realized is they have a disparity study, they have recommendations. Our job in this project is basically then how do we operationalize all that? So I'd be curious for those who have been around since the inception or are beginning to, at the beginning stages, what did that look like, and where did you see sort of the short-term value? Where can we show short-term value in a quick way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of my big takeaways on this is not to forget the end user. As I think a lot of times we in central procurement, and I was probably the most guilty of being stuck in an ivory tower at times, but I think a lot of times we maybe take the end user, the person working in a DOT maintenance facility, for granted. And we just assume that they're going to do what we in procurement ask them to do. And I think that's a huge mistake. So I think one of the real keys to success in rolling out a DEI program is to make sure that you're communicating with them and that communication is two-way. And I'll just sort of illustrate this. So if you're running a PennDOT maintenance facility in Altoona, Pennsylvania, home of the Altoona Curve baseball team, and there's a leak in your facility and the roof is leaking, you have one job, which is to fix the leak. And what I think happens very often is that person who's working in that facility, who's maybe worked there for 10, 15 years, they typically will call the roofing company they've used for the last 15 years to come in and fix the leak. And I think that's all well and good. That's their primary job, is to plug the leak. What we have to do in central procurement, because those kinds of transactions happen all day, every day. I think our job, if we really want to be serious about DEI and make it not just something that we announce, from our offices, but something that actually gets implemented by those end users all across our states and our counties, we need to have a conversation with that person in the PennDOT facility in Altoona and talking about why DEI is important. And as Jamie said at the very beginning, why DEI is an advantage to you in that PennDOT facility, not just something that you have to do. How looking beyond the suppliers you've traditionally used can help you find suppliers who may have the bandwidth to take on your project, how it might get the work done faster and potentially cheaper and with higher quality and more care than just relying on the company you've used forever. But I think that's a huge challenge, something that we don't think about enough, is how does that end user, how are they engaging with the policies that we're putting out, and what can we do to support them, and in so doing, make a policy like greater DEI take root.
I think those are great points, David. For our entity, one of the things that's been really important for me is education, not just for my team, but also for my end users. And so I have taken the approach of either ad hoc and or annual training that goes into the entire purchasing scope, but also speaks to the application of those special programs geared towards DEI. What I did like that you pointed out is there is an opportunity for, in those environments, for me to kind of give more context to how and why the programs exist. Not necessarily my role, because we do have a office that is specifically the supplier diversity office, right? But in my training, I think because I tend to have that, or my office tends to have that definite one-on-one engagement with the end user to kind of lend or offer a different lens on why they are being asked to be a part of this particular program. So I appreciate that point, and I'm taking it back to my desk with me.
And to expand on what Kristen just said was it's that one-on-one. I think giving opportunities to either a job fair or a vendor fair where you allow the time to have the meetings to explain to someone interested in working for you or someone interested in being hired by you, what do we do? And what's the opportunities that they have? When I train vendors in the RFP process, I say these are ways that you will shine better. This will make you stand out instead of a maybe pile into a yes pile. Not telling them what to say, but how procurement works. And that carries over into working with anyone, explaining what we do really opens up the eyes for opportunities.
Well, I like you bringing up about how procurement works. One of the, I guess, the specific nuances I was trying to create with the topic is pointing out that DEI programs and procurement have independent missions in many cases, because there's several other things that DEI programs may do that is not procurement, and procurement has to be able to design for throughput for all of the bids and solicitations that need to work that represent a project for the agency or the entity that has to be executed. We did a review of a DEI program for a different state, and for example, interpretations on if the supplier makes a commitment to use a certain amount of subcontractor labor, is that checked on a annual basis? Is it checked on a quarterly basis? Is it checked on a per PO basis? And answering those questions and thinking about how procurement is able to maintain throughput while helping support the DEI mission is very important, because we can't have procurement not be able to execute work because they have to check or touch every single time that something happens unless we are staffed for that and are able to execute to that. So I do think it's very important to think about the mission that procurement has, both in terms of being a good steward of taxpayer dollars, creating throughput for our end users, and then how do we weave and integrate the DEI programs into that in a way that it's going to advance both missions. So I don't know if anyone has dealt with trying to connect with a DEI process that's external to procurement and trying to create that common understanding of mutual missions. Do any of you guys have a DEI shop or a DEI entity that is outside of your procurement shop, and how do you try to communicate mutually the two missions?
Following your question, we do have that supplier diversity office where their goal and their focus is to increase, spend with locally owned small business and minority and women. And so what drives our engagement are our policies and our ordinances that specify the roles of each entity. And it really creates a clear line as to who is responsible for what, and making sure that they don't bleed into the other, but also keeping in mind the state regulations or federal guidelines that procurement has to adhere to that may be outside of the efforts of the DEI. And so the ordinances help to formally create that relationship, but there's just a constant communication. I call them one of my key partners whenever I speak with them, or vendors, or my end users. And so I think it's important that the relationship is there and then formalized in a way that clearly defines where everybody should land on a daily basis without violating procurement policy.
One other point that I wanted to make that has been particularly helpful in the reading that I've done is creating sort of a racial equity toolkit and a framework to help guide decision-making across departments and initiatives. And this is such a foreign concept as it relates to governments. How about we put a plan out there for what we're going to buy based on planning and equitable allocation to invest across the entire state, across the community, etc. So what I mean by all of that is, if we put the plan out there for what we're going to buy, it's more than just putting out an 80-page RFP and trying to get vendors to respond to it. It's saying, here's what we're going to do over the next 2 years. Come and talk to us. Ask us questions. Let us talk to you about what we're going to buy. Help us get some of that input from the community and from an infrastructure perspective, whether it be from minorities or other underrepresented folks. And maybe then state government can start to think about our expenditures in a different way, other than we need this, we're going to go buy it. How about we start thinking in a more equitable manner of spending?
Jamie, I think that's a great point. When you have a plan, one of the things that it does is it gives the entire business community to what's coming up, right? You can train for the Super Bowl. But the other thing that allows your organization to do is to go out and research and find the suppliers who can grow into those roles, or who can be ready, to come when it's time and enter your supply base. So I think that the idea of thinking about DEI in the context of longer term planning for procurement is fantastic. The on the last question, I just wanted to jump in though and say, it is very common, and I would say every single one of our campuses has a senior leader focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're focused on on recruiting a diverse student body. They're focused on creating a welcoming and supportive academic community on our campuses and a diverse workforce. I find working with those offices to be very complementary. And you think about people's relationship with the university as they come first, maybe as a student, maybe they go on and work for a large employer. Maybe they are an entrepreneur and found their own business, and then seek to have a long-term business relationship with the university. We want to have a supply base that looks roughly like our student body and our faculty, and so procurement is definitely one piece of the diversity and DEI equation for higher education.
I think that one of the most important things is really getting out there into the community, because again, if you put a big initiative out and you announce it from Augusta or from Oakland, not everyone knows about it. And one of the great examples that I've seen over the last year came out of Nebraska, which you may not think of as a real hotbed for diversity, unlike a big northeastern state like where I come from. But Doug Carlson, who was the chief procurement officer there, launched what he called the concierge program, where he and his team sort of regularly went out physically into the community, particularly in Omaha, and went out and recruited diverse businesses to come and be part of the process in Nebraska with great results. And so I think that those kind of examples where procurement leaders themselves personally roll up their sleeves, get out there in the community, can have really incredible results.
Yeah, and Doug's now in higher ed. He's at the University of Nebraska now, David.
And he's doing the same thing there.
Yeah, and that's a great point. But the thing that I would add on to that is to bring some of these suppliers into your community. David, you made the example of the Altoona Curve, facilities manager who's working with somebody who's familiar with them. So when you're thinking about engaging the community, it's not just the supplier community and the community outside your organization. You're really thinking about how to bring the community of stakeholders and business partners that you have inside your organization together with that supplier community outside.
Victor, any last chime in off of any of the last little bit of conversation before I close out by sort of telling people what's in this survey?
No, I'm just taking down tons of notes. Great conversations today, and I totally agree with getting out in the community and reaching out to end users and vendors, and specifically end users. When I meet with different departments, I never say anything about what we do in procurement. I always ask, tell me about you. Tell me about your mission. What's your passions? What do you like to do? And then once I get an understanding, then I can relate to them using their terms and what we do in procurement and how we can help. And that works out the same way with somebody, a vendor coming in. First, tell me about you. And I will never turn down a vendor cold call where, hey, can I take 5 minutes of your time, which is never 5 minutes, but I will never turn it down. I always walk away learning something.
So as we come towards the tail end of this so that people can get back into their day job, I wanted to point out that we have an active survey going on the connections between public procurement and DEI programs. That's at civicinitiatives.com/DEI/survey. So the survey is going to go across 6 individual topic areas. So we're asked about establishing goals and measures. So how do you identify the groups that are in question? Removing barriers to entry. How do we make it so that if there are aspects of our procurement that wouldn't be as available to small and diverse businesses as large businesses, for example, anything from performance bonds to costly insurance that maybe small businesses can't even qualify for. So really looking and scrubbing our process and saying, where have we created barriers to entry that we may not be aware of? Actively working to expand the DEI vendor pool, which was a good part of the last conversation that we had, encouraging and requiring use of DEI vendors. How do you establish soft goals and hard targets and be able to then follow that through into how you measure and evaluate the program performance? So if we set goals and then we award based on that, how do we make sure that people are actually paid, and how do we validate that the program is actually delivering the outcomes that we're looking for? And then how do we report out successes and the program needs both to our legislative entities or our executive entities, as well as the vendor community themselves? So that survey is out now. It's described as being through December 2nd. I will probably extend that for another week just so that people can work off their Thanksgiving turkey and make sure that they take a look at it. But we're happy to report out and flow out, any outcomes that came from that survey in a future piece. So with that, we're at about 45 minutes in. Anybody have any thoughts that they have not expressed that they'd like to share with us before we jump out?
Dustin, just two quick thoughts. If there are any underrepresented or underserved businesses that are fortunate enough to hear this podcast, please feel free to reach out to any one of us to start having the conversations. I welcome emails, text, calls. Happy to have that conversation with folks and welcoming input. And for those of us that are not eating turkey and eating lobster, as that is our New England turkey, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And I hope folks get a moment of downtime and a breather over the next couple of days.
Go ahead, Justin.
Oh, no, I was just going to wish you a happy birthday. And then, Jamie, I gave you a hard time about your Patriots earlier in the year, and they look like they're headed in the right direction.
See ya in the Super Bowl.
Let's go.
That far.
As a Cowboys fan, I may decide whether I edit that last part of the audio or not. That's the good thing about have the editing tool.
Agree against the football comments, Dustin.
Okay, team. Thank you guys for showing up this morning. Thank you for our West Coasters for the 7 a.m. Jump off call. I appreciate it. And you guys added a lot to the conversation.